"I'm sorry, sir. I don't have your name on the list." The young wedding coordinator scrolled through her tablet, frowned, and checked it a second time, then a third. "I must have the wrong list," I said, forcing a smile. She shook her head politely. "No, sir. I've checked every table twice. I don't see your name anywhere." Around me, guests laughed their way through the ballroom doors. Waiters slipped past with trays of sparkling cider. Somewhere inside, a violinist had already started on something soft and familiar. Then I saw my son, Michael, standing under a canopy of string lights, laughing for photographs with his new wife. He never glanced toward the entrance. He never knew I was standing 30 feet away. Or maybe he did. I tightened my grip on the wrapped cedar box I'd spent 6 weeks having built for him and Sarah. The coordinator lowered her voice. "Would you like me to find someone for you?" I looked through the glass doors one last time. Sarah's parents were already seated at the head table. Her brothers were greeting guests near the bar. Cousins I didn't recognize filled 3 full tables. But somehow, the father of the groom hadn't made the list at all. "No," I said quietly. "I think I've seen enough. My name is Thomas Reyes. I'm 66, retired from 31 years with the fire department, widowed, and until that evening, I believed there wasn't much I wouldn't do for my only son." Looking back, that drive home probably changed both our lives. The wedding was held just outside Denver. I lived an hour south, near Colorado Springs, but I'd left before 6 that morning because I don't trust mountain traffic, and at my age, I try not to drive after dark if I can help it. Still, for Michael, I would have driven twice as far. The gray suit I wore that day was the same one I'd worn to my wife Carol's funeral 2 years earlier. She'd bought it for our 35th anniversary. "It's classic," she'd said, straightening my collar in the mirror. "You'll wear this to every occasion that matters." She wasn't wrong. I just never imagined one of those occasions would end with me sitting alone in my truck in a parking lot outside a reception hall. The gift on the passenger seat wasn't extravagant. Michael had always loved the cedar chest Carol kept her sewing supplies in, so I'd had a local carpenter build a smaller version as a keepsake box. Inside, I'd tucked a bundle of Carol's letters, the ones she wrote me during my 2 deployments to wildfire duty out of state, back before Michael was even born. She used to say Sarah reminded her of herself at that age, patient and steady. She'd hoped someday those letters might mean something to both of them. The box stayed sealed on my passenger seat the entire drive home. I started the truck. No tears. No anger. Just a long, quiet stretch of highway. Michael wasn't always like this. As a boy, he waved at me twice from the school bus window every single morning, like he was worried I might forget his face by the time he got home. When Carol got sick, he drove up from Denver every other weekend to sit with her, holding her hand through infusions I couldn't always get away from work to attend. Back then, I thought Carol and I had done something right. After trade school, Michael opened a small auto shop specializing in classic truck restorations. Business was steady at first. Then parts costs climbed, a partnership soured, and one big fleet contract fell through halfway into the job. By the time he and Sarah bought their first condo outside Aurora, money was already tight. I never wanted them to know how much it worried me, so I quietly stepped in. Half the down payment came out of my pension savings. Michael swore he'd pay me back. I told him to worry about building a life instead. A year later, things got worse. He called one evening, sounding smaller than I'd ever heard him. "Dad, I hate even asking. You don't have to. I might fall behind on the mortgage." "How much?" He hesitated. "I'll figure it out." "You just did." That was the beginning. One mortgage payment became 2, then became automatic. I set it up directly through my bank so neither of us had to have that conversation again. Michael never asked twice. I never brought it up again either. 2.5 years. 30 payments. Not because I had money to spare. I didn't, not really. A modest pension, Social Security, savings Carol and I had built carefully over 4 decades. Every payment meant putting off a roof repair, skipping the one trip to see my sister in Arizona, driving my truck one more year past when I should have traded it in. I never resented it. Helping your child isn't supposed to feel like a debt. At least that's what I told myself. When Michael called to say he and Sarah were finally getting married, I was overjoyed. Carol never lived to see it. That still stings more than I let on. But grief doesn't wait politely for life to catch up. The invitation came in the mail 6 weeks before the wedding. Something about it felt off immediately. No handwritten note, no love, Michael scrawled in the corner, just a printed card. Stranger still, there was no seating assignment, no rehearsal dinner details, no RSVP envelope. I called him. Did something get left out of the invite? He laughed it off. Dad, don't worry about it. Just show up. Everything's handled. Simple enough. Or so I believed. The morning of the wedding, I stopped at a florist and bought a small bundle of yellow tulips, Carol's favorite. I'd planned to leave them at whatever memorial table couples sometimes set up for the parent who couldn't be there. I never found out if there even was one, because I never made it past the front doors. The drive home felt twice as long as the drive there. Somewhere around Castle Rock, I pulled off at a rest stop and opened the cedar box, running my thumb across the edge of Carol's letters. Her handwriting looked exactly the way I remembered, small, careful, unhurried. She used to tell Michael something whenever he slipped up as a boy. Character isn't what you show the people watching. It's what you give the people who'll love you regardless. I wondered if he'd forgotten that, or if I'd simply failed to teach it well enough. I got home a little after midnight. The house felt exactly as it always did, quiet, familiar, safe. I hung the suit back in the closet and set the unopened gift on Carol's old sewing table. Then I sat down at the computer and logged into my bank account. There it was. Automatic transfer scheduled. First of every month. I stared at the screen for almost a full minute. No speech, no dramatic flourish. I clicked Cancel Automatic Payments. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure? For the first time in 2.5 years, that wasn't a hard question. I clicked yes, shut down the computer, and went to bed knowing that somewhere north of me, my son had no idea his life was about to look very different. The morning after the wedding, I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt lighter. Not happy. Just lighter, the way you feel setting down a bag you didn't realize had gotten so heavy. For over 2 years, I'd carried a responsibility that hadn't technically been mine to carry. Every month, before I paid a single one of my own bills, I made sure Michael and Sarah's mortgage cleared. I never thought of it as anything but fatherhood. At least, that's what I'd always believed. I made a pot of coffee and sat on the back deck overlooking the ridge behind the house. A pair of magpies worked over Carol's old bird feeder, the one she refused to let me take down even after the squirrels started raiding it nightly. She used to say the birds meant somebody was still keeping an eye on us. I wished she were around to tell me what to make of all this. Life settled back into its usual shape. Tuesday mornings I helped out at the VFW hall kitchen. Thursday afternoons I met 2 guys from my old station for coffee at the same diner we'd been going to since before I retired. Saturdays I split wood, more out of habit than need. Nothing dramatic. Just an ordinary retirement. Except for one thing. My checking account no longer lost close to $1,700 on the first of every month. I hadn't realized how much room that freed up until I actually looked at the numbers. For the first time in years, I scheduled the roof repair I'd been putting off. I finally replaced the water heater Carol had wanted gone before she got sick. I even bought a real recliner after 20-some years in the same worn-out armchair. Every purchase came with the same small guilt. I should have done this sooner. Then another voice answered back. No, you just stopped paying somebody else's bills. Michael didn't call. Not that week, not the next. Not to check that I'd made it home safely. Not to explain why I hadn't been on the list. Not even to thank me for a gift he never actually received. At first I told myself there had to be some explanation, a coordinator's mistake, a mix-up in table assignments, something. But each day that passed made those excuses harder to believe. Someone who genuinely cared would have called. 1 day, 2 days, a week. Silence has a way of saying things people won't say out loud. A few weeks later, I stopped by my credit union to check on some CDs. My longtime banker, Denise, glanced at her screen and smiled. Looks like your monthly outflow dropped quite a bit. It did. You finally canceled that recurring transfer. I nodded. It was time. She didn't pry. Good bankers rarely do. But she said something on my way out that stuck with me the rest of the day. Sometimes helping someone too long is the thing that keeps them from learning to stand on their own. I thought about that the whole drive home. Maybe I'd confused love with rescue. Carol had warned me once, years earlier, back when Michael forgot to repay a small loan for a used truck. I'd laughed it off. She hadn't. Tom, she'd said gently, catch him when he falls. Don't carry him after he's already able to walk. At the time I thought she was being too hard on him. Now I wasn't so sure. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was digging through a kitchen drawer for batteries and found an old Father's Day card instead. Michael couldn't have been more than 10. The front read "World's Best Dad." Inside, in crooked block letters, "When I grow up I want to be just like you." I sat at the table holding that card for a long time. People don't become strangers overnight. It happens one small compromise at a time, one excuse, one omission, one decision to impress the wrong crowd. I wasn't grieving the man Michael had become. I was grieving the boy I used to know. Exactly 1 month after the wedding, my phone buzzed while I was standing in the cereal aisle. Michael. Not a call, a text. I smiled, just for a second, thinking maybe this was it. The apology. Dad, the mortgage payment didn't go through. That was the whole message. Not "How are you?" Not "I'm sorry about the wedding." Not "Can we talk?" For words about money. I stood there while other shoppers pushed carts around me. A woman clipped my cart with hers. "Sorry," she said. "It's fine," I told her. She'd apologized faster than my own son had in a month. I put the phone away, finished shopping, drove home, put away the groceries, fed the birds, made dinner. Only after the dishes were done did I pick the phone back up and read the message again. It didn't read like a son talking to his father. It read like a memo to accounting. I typed 6 words back. "I suppose you'll have to. No insults. No lecture. Just the truth." I hit send. The reply came almost instantly. My phone started ringing. "Michael." I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Then a third time. 5 missed calls inside 20 minutes. Then texts. "Dad, pick up." 5 minutes later. "This isn't funny." 10 minutes after that. "The payment bounced, call me now." Still nothing about the wedding. The mortgage still outweighed his own father. I turned the phone face down and went out to split kindling. About an hour later my neighbor, Hal, wandered over with 2 fishing poles over his shoulder. "Still on for Saturday? Wouldn't miss it." He studied me a second too long. "You good?" "I think so." "You sure?" I leaned on the axe. "Hal, you ever spend years solving somebody else's problems for them?" He laughed. "I raised 2 boys. What do you think? Then you know." He nodded slowly. The hard part was never learning to help. It was learning when to quit. That evening, curiosity finally won. I listened to Michael's first voicemail. "Dad, I don't know what happened. The bank says the transfer failed. There's got to be some mix-up. Call me back." A mix-up. He genuinely believed it was a banking glitch. Not once did he wonder whether the man who'd been quietly covering his mortgage for 2.5 years might have had a reason to stop. Not once did he ask if I was hurt. Only whether the payment had gone through. I deleted the voicemail and looked out at the ridge as the light faded. For the first time since Carol died, something clicked into place. I hadn't just been paying my son's mortgage. I'd been quietly financing the idea that his choices didn't carry weight. And sooner or later, every idea like that comes due. The knocking started just after 8 on a Saturday morning. 3 hard raps, a pause, 3 more. I already knew who it was. Hal wasn't due for another hour, and he always texted first. Michael never had. I opened the door. He looked worn down. Wrinkled shirt, 3 days of stubble, dark circles under his eyes that reminded me too much of the nights I'd sat beside Carol's hospital bed. Dad. He stood there like he was waiting for permission to come in. I stepped aside. He walked through the house he grew up in. Nothing had changed much. Carol's quilt still draped over the couch, the same photos lining the hallway, the same cuckoo clock still off by 4 minutes. He looked around like he hadn't noticed any of it in years. You kept everything the same. I like remembering. Neither of us sat right away. Finally, he cleared his throat. The bank says we're a month behind. I know. You canceled the transfer. I did. Why? I looked at him for a long moment. You really don't know? His eyes dropped to the floor. I figured maybe something happened with your money. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because after everything, his first guess was still about money. My finances are fine. Then why? I pulled out a kitchen chair. See, for nearly a minute, neither of us said anything. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. Why wasn't I at your wedding? He rubbed his forehead. Dad, it wasn't supposed to go down like that. Then tell me how it was supposed to go. The coordinator messed something up. I nodded slowly. I see. It got chaotic. 200 people, mistakes happen. So you agree. Then why didn't you call me afterward? His relief vanished. You had a whole month. I've been busy. Too busy to check whether your father made it home after driving an hour each way? He opened his mouth, closed it. There wasn't a good answer because there wasn't one. Finally, he said the words I'd been bracing for. I'm sorry. It came out flat, rehearsed, the way you apologize for bumping into a stranger's cart, not for leaving your own father outside a wedding. I asked calmly, are you sorry you hurt me? Or sorry the payment stopped? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. The doorbell rang. Michael frowned. You expecting someone? I believe so. I opened it. Sarah stood there looking mortified. I didn't know Michael was already here. Neither did I. She stepped inside carrying a small bag from the bakery. I brought scones. Your wife used to bring cinnamon scones to the shop every Christmas, right? Michael mentioned it once. I appreciated that more than she probably knew. We sat around the kitchen table. No one touched the bakery bag. Sarah spoke first. Thomas, I owe you an apology. I noticed she said Thomas, not Dad, not Mr. Reyes. Just Thomas. I found something out yesterday. She glanced at Michael. You never told me. He stared at the table. I thought your business was covering the mortgage, Sarah said. Looking at me. I honestly believed we were handling it ourselves. I folded my hands. I never thought it mattered who paid. It matters now. She turned toward her husband. You told me the shop was covering us. I was trying to protect you. From what? From worrying. Sarah shook her head. No, you were protecting yourself. The conversation came apart quickly after that. Michael admitted he'd never told Sarah about the automatic transfers, had let everyone, her parents included, believe the shop had finally taken off. In reality, every month for 2.5 years, my account had quietly absorbed the difference. Sarah looked stunned. For 2.5 years? I nodded. Why didn't you ever say anything? I wasn't buying gratitude. I smiled sadly. I was trying to buy my son time. She wiped her eyes. I had no idea. I know. I believe you. Then I asked the question neither of them wanted to answer. Who decided I shouldn't be at the wedding? Michael answered too fast. Nobody decided that. I got up, walked to the hallway, and pulled a folded envelope from a drawer beside my desk. I set it on the table. Open it. Michael looked confused. Inside were several printed emails. His face went pale reading the header. What is this? The wedding coordinator sent it. Sarah looked between us. Why would she contact you? Because 2 days after the wedding, she mailed me an apology. I hadn't told a single person, not even Hal. She'd recognized me from the entrance and apparently couldn't shake what she'd seen. She'd written, Mr. Reyes, I felt you deserved to know this wasn't a scheduling error. Attached were the final seating chart revisions. Michael's face drained further. Sarah reached for the pages. Near the bottom, one line had been struck through. Thomas Reyes, Table 4. Beside it, handwritten, remove. Below that, seat reassigned to Gerald Whitfield. Sarah frowned. Who's Gerald? I answered quietly, your father. She looked at Michael. You swapped your dad's seat for mine? You literally removed him. It wasn't like that. She flipped to the next page. An email from Michael to the coordinator. Please make the change we talked about. No misunderstanding. No mix-up. No coordinator error. Sarah looked like the wind had gone out of her. You lied to me. Michael put his face in his hands. I didn't know how to explain it. Try. He couldn't. Finally he whispered, your dad was covering part of the reception cost. I thought I wanted more of your family up front. Sarah stared at him. So you decided the solution was cutting out your own father? I thought he stopped. There was no end to that sentence that made any sense. I spoke softly. You know what actually hurts the most? It isn't missing the wedding. It's knowing the seat existed. I tapped the page. You gave it away. Sarah stood abruptly. I need some air. The screen door clicked shut behind her. Michael sat frozen. For the first time all morning, he looked less worried about the mortgage and more afraid of what he'd become. I had no interest in humiliating him. Life was already handling that. But something told me the missed mortgage payment was about to be the smallest problem in that marriage. Sarah stayed out on the back porch nearly 15 minutes. Through the window, I watched her standing near Carol's old rose bushes, still blooming stubborn and red against the fence. Carol used to say if you tended something long enough, it eventually bloomed. Sometimes people were the same. Sometimes they weren't. Michael finally looked up. Dad. I didn't answer. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I said quietly. You don't. He swallowed. But I didn't want to humiliate you. Then what did you want? He searched for an answer that didn't exist. I didn't want conflict. So avoiding conflict meant embarrassing your father instead. It wasn't supposed to happen at the door. Michael, whether you cut me out at the entrance or by email a week earlier wouldn't have changed a thing. He looked away. The decision had already been made long before I ever put on that suit. Sarah came back inside a few minutes later, eyes red, and sat without looking at either of us. I called my mom. Michael looked up. Why? Because I wanted to know if she knew. Sarah stared straight ahead. She didn't. What? My parents thought you wanted the ceremony small on your side. They had no idea your own father wasn't invited. Her voice cracked. My dad asked twice why you weren't at the rehearsal dinner. I told him you said Thomas wasn't feeling well. She shook her head. I defended you. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than shouting. I wasn't shocked. Once people tell one lie, they usually need another to protect it, and eventually they lose track of which version they told to whom. Sarah reached into her bag. I found something else. I wasn't looking for it. I was digging for our insurance paperwork. She set several credit card statements on the table. Michael already knew where this was going. Sarah, don't. Explain these. Charges from steakhouses, a ski resort, a jewelry store, a leased sports coupe. Michael rubbed his temples. I can explain. Please do. Some of it was client entertainment. She slid another statement toward him. 4,000 at a jewelry counter. Silence. Business, he offered weakly. Still nothing. I stood quietly. This isn't my conversation. No, Thomas, Sarah said. You should hear this. Michael looked miserable. Finally, he admitted it. I didn't want anyone thinking I couldn't provide. Sarah stared. So while your father was covering our mortgage, you were spending on watches and ski trips to look successful? He nodded slowly. I thought the business would turn around. I don't know. You bought a car. I was trying to look successful. You bought vacations. I thought it mattered how things looked. Sarah laughed, bitter. It mattered more than the truth did. Something clicked for me right then, something that had bothered me for a while without a name. Michael had never had to ask me for more because he never had to. He already knew I'd quietly fix the biggest hole every month. That left whatever he actually earned free to spend on looking the part for everyone else. Not because he was cruel, because he'd gotten hooked on appearances, and I'd unknowingly kept the supply running. That realization hurt nearly as much as the wedding had. Sarah looked at me. Thomas, I'm so ashamed. You didn't build this, I said gently. No, but I lived inside it. She wasn't wrong. Whether she'd known about the mortgage or not, she'd been living in the home my money quietly protected. She turned back to Michael. You know what actually hurts the most? You didn't trust me enough to struggle alongside you. I was trying to give you a better life. You gave me a fake one. Michael suddenly looked at me. Are you going to let us lose the house? It was the first question he'd asked all morning that wasn't about himself. There was real fear behind it. I answered honestly, I don't know. Sarah looked startled. You don't know? I spent 2.5 years preventing consequences. I leaned back. Maybe it's time consequences taught the lesson I couldn't. Michael's eyes filled. They'll foreclose. Not tomorrow. But eventually if you can't catch up. If you have the money. I don't, he said, and for the first time he told the whole truth. Business wasn't just slow, it was sinking. 2 jobs had gone unpaid. A supplier was threatening to sue over an outstanding balance. Cards were maxed. The business account barely covered next week's parts order. I listened without interrupting. 2.5 years earlier, I would have had my checkbook open before he finished the sentence. Now I just listened. When he finished, I asked one question. Have you told Sarah all of this? He shook his head. Sarah closed her eyes. So the mortgage wasn't the only thing you kept from me. No. She looked exhausted. I married a man. Turns out I married a performance. That afternoon they left together. Not because anything had been resolved, but because nothing had yet. At the door, Michael stopped. Dad, I really am sorry. I believed he meant it this time, but regret and responsibility aren't the same currency. I know. Can we fix this? I looked past him toward Carol's roses. Broken trust doesn't get repaired with promises. It gets repaired with choices. He nodded slowly. I understand. I'm not sure you do yet. He took that without arguing. For the first time in years, he left my house without asking me for a single thing. 3 days later, I got a call from the credit union, a loan officer confirming the recurring transfers had permanently stopped. They have, I told her. Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Before hanging up, she added, the homeowners have contacted us directly requesting a hardship modification. So they'd finally started talking to the bank themselves instead of waiting on me. That was progress. Small but real. I went out that evening with a watering can for Carol's roses. Pouring water around their roots. Something settled in me. Love isn't always giving people what they want. Sometimes it's stepping back far enough that they finally become who they were supposed to be. Whether Michael made it through this would depend on him now, not on me. About 2 weeks passed before I heard from him again. No text this time. No call. On a gray Thursday afternoon, he showed up at my door with a cardboard box. He looked different. Not younger, not healthier exactly, but the confidence that always seemed tied to expensive gear was gone. He looked honest. "Can I come in?" I nodded. He set the box on the table. Inside were 2 watches, an unopened tablet, a set of golf clubs, a leather bag still with the tags on. "Cleaning house," he said, managing a weak smile. "Selling whatever isn't necessary. That's a start. Won't cover much." "No, but that's not the point." He took a cup of coffee and we sat quietly for a while. Finally he spoke. "I met with the bank." "How'd it go?" "They agreed to pause the foreclosure process. If we make 3 payments on our own on time, they'll modify the loan." "And can you?" "I don't know." For the first time in years, he wasn't pretending to have the answer. Oddly, that gave me some hope. A few days later, Sarah called and asked if I'd meet her for lunch. We sat at a diner halfway between our 2 towns, the kind of place where the waitress calls everyone by their first name. She looked tired but resolved. "I wanted to tell you something before Michael does," she said. "I sold my engagement ring." I looked up. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She smiled sadly. "It wasn't the diamond that made us married." "What did you do with the money?" "Paid off 2 of the credit cards." I couldn't help smiling. Carol would have liked that answer. She stirred her tea. "I was angry with you for a while." "I know. But I think I understand now. You weren't trying to punish us. You were forcing us to actually look at things." "Exactly. I wish we'd learned that sooner." "So do I." Over the following weeks, I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends. Michael sold one of his shop trucks, dropped a country club membership I never even knew he had, stopped leasing equipment he barely used. He started taking on smaller jobs himself instead of farming everything out to subcontractors. Hal ran into him at the hardware store one afternoon. "Your boy was loading rebar into his own truck," Hal told me, helping me stack cordwood. "Never seen him do that." "I used to." "Hello, good. Maybe he's finally becoming a mechanic instead of pretending to run an empire." Then came a call I hadn't expected. "Dad, I need a favor." I waited. "Not money," he said quickly. "I need advice. The bank wants a real budget. I've never made one. You've run a shop for 8 years. "I know. I just always figured next month would fix this month." Long silence. "Come over," I said. For the next 4 hours, we sat at my kitchen table surrounded by receipts, tax forms, invoices, and a legal pad. I taught him what my own father had taught me. Every dollar gets a job before you spend it. We split everything into 3 piles. Necessary, optional, waste. The waste pile grew embarrassingly large. Streaming subscriptions he'd forgotten about, a leased SUV, gym passes nobody used, client dinners that never produced a single job. "I can't believe I let it get this bad," Michael said, rubbing his forehead. "It didn't happen overnight. No, one excuse at a time." He looked at me. "I sound like you." "Not the worst thing you could sound like." As we wrapped up, he asked quietly, "Can I ask you something? When you stopped paying, were you trying to hurt me?" "No," I said honestly. "I was trying to stop hurting myself." He frowned. "I don't understand. I spent years thinking love meant shielding you from every consequence. I folded the budget sheets. But every month I solved your problem, I gave you permission not to solve it yourself." He was quiet a long while. "I never saw it that way." "I know. I thought I was helping. I was. But helping and rescuing aren't the same thing." A week later, Michael asked me to meet him somewhere. He drove me out to one of his job sites. Not a fancy build, just a modest bungalow owned by an elderly widow. He introduced me to Mrs. Ferris, who smiled warmly. "Your son refuses to overcharge me." Michael looked embarrassed. "I just charge what the work costs." Mrs. Ferris laughed. "He told me he'd rather build trust than pad an invoice." Walking back to the truck, I glanced at him. "That's new." He smiled. "Been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "Mom used to say character isn't what you show the people watching." I stopped walking. You remember that? I remember all of it. I just forgot to live by it. Before he left that evening, he set an envelope on my kitchen table. Open it later. After he left, I did. Inside was a handwritten letter, not typed, not rushed. Dad, I kept wondering why you never yelled at me. Now I know. The silence gave me room to hear my own mistakes without anyone else's voice in the way. I can't undo the wedding. I can't give you back that day. But I promise you'll never again have to wonder where you stand with me. I want to earn your trust back, not buy it. Michael. I folded the letter and slid it inside Carol's cedar box, next to her old letters. For the first time since that terrible afternoon in Denver, the box finally held something worth keeping alongside her. Autumn settled in slow that year. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, then bare, and for the first time in a long while I caught myself looking forward instead of back. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens one honest conversation, one hard decision, one kept promise at a time. Michael was learning that. So was I. 3 months after the wedding, another envelope showed up in my mailbox. This one wasn't printed by an expensive stationer. Not even, no gold foil. Just a plain white envelope, my name written across the front in Michael's own handwriting. Inside was a single card. Dad, would you come to dinner Sunday? I already saved you a seat. I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. That Sunday, I drove the hour back to Aurora. Same highway, same truck. Only this time I wasn't carrying a wedding gift. I was carrying Carol's cedar box. Pulling into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was what wasn't there. The leased SUV was gone. The landscaping crew sign was gone. The overpriced patio set had been swapped for a plain wooden picnic table. The place looked lived in instead of staged. Sarah opened the door before I made it up the walk, and this time she didn't just smile. She hugged me. I'm really glad you came. So am I. Inside, the smell of pot roast filled the house. The same smell Carol used to fill our kitchen with every Sunday. Somewhere down the hall, a small voice, Sarah's little niece, visiting for the weekend, shrieked, "Grandpa Tom's here." I hadn't realized how much I'd missed hearing anything close to that word. Then Michael walked in. He looked healthier, not richer. Jeans, a flannel shirt, sawdust still clinging to one sleeve. He looked more like the boy who used to help me stack fence posts than the man who'd spent years pretending to be someone else. Without a word, he handed me a framed photograph. Their wedding portrait. I recognized it right away, except something had changed. The original showed Michael and Sarah flanked by her parents. This one had been carefully edited, not to rewrite the day, but to create the memory that should have existed. There I was, standing beside my son, exactly where I belonged. I looked up. His eyes were already wet. "I know it isn't real," he said. "No," I said softly. "It isn't. I can't change what happened. I know. But I wanted you to see it. That's where you always belonged." I set the frame down and hugged my son for the first time in longer than either of us could probably count. Neither of us said anything else. Sometimes silence is finally the right thing. Dinner was simple. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, dinner rolls, no caterers, no string lights, no seating chart. Just family. As we finished dessert, Michael stood and tapped his glass with a fork. "I want to say something." Everyone turned, including Sarah's parents, visiting for the weekend. He looked straight at me. "I owe someone an apology I should have given a long time ago." The table went quiet. When I planned our wedding, I cared more about how it looked than about honoring the man who spent his whole life taking care of me. I convinced myself appearances were the same thing as success. They're not. He paused. The strongest man I know drove an hour to be there for me, and I left him standing outside. Sarah reached for his hand. "I'll regret that for a long time." He turned to his in-laws. "I owe you both an apology too. I let you believe things about that day that weren't true." Sarah's father stood slowly. I remember wondering where you were, Thomas. I should have asked harder. He crossed the room and put out his hand. I'm sorry. I shook it. So am I. There wasn't any bitterness left in it. Just a quiet sadness for time neither of us would get back. After dinner, Michael and I sat out on the back steps while the kids chased fireflies across the yard. Bank approved the modification, he said. Congratulations. We've made every payment ourselves since. I know you have. He smiled. Asked Denise how you were doing. You've still got friends in low places. I've got friends, period. He looked out over the yard. I almost asked if you'd start helping again. I raised an eyebrow. Almost. I realized if I asked, I'd be proving I hadn't actually learned anything. You've learned plenty. We're gonna finish paying it off ourselves. And when we do, he grinned. I'm taking you fishing somewhere that isn't Hal's Pond. I laughed. As long as it's a round trip. He looked confused for half a second, then burst out laughing. So did I. First time we'd laughed together like that in longer than I wanted to admit. Before I drove home, he walked me out to the truck. As I opened the door, he stopped me. Dad. Yeah. I used to think making it meant a bigger garage and a nicer truck. He glanced back toward the porch, where Sarah stood waving with the kids. Now I think making it just means the people you love still pick up when you call. I put a hand on his shoulder. Don't waste that. I won't. When I got home that night, I set Carol's cedar box on the living room shelf. Inside were her letters, Michael's handwritten note, and now the new photograph. Not because it erased what happened, nothing ever really does, but because it reminded me that forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past. It just gives the future room to breathe. Carol used to say families aren't held together by getting everything right. They're held together by humility. Someone has to admit they were wrong, and someone has to choose to forgive them for it. Both of those take more courage than most people ever give them credit for. If you're reading this, maybe there's someone in your own life you've been taking for granted, or someone you've been putting off forgiving. Don't wait for a wedding or a funeral or a crisis to remind you what actually matters. Tell the people you love that you love them while they're still around to hear it.